Seas of CFB. You are tuning in to the leading source of everything college football and the gambling in relation to that. As always, you got myself, Alec Pappas, and my co-host Brian Kraft and Chris Porritt. Gentlemen, it was a pretty eventful week. Some stuff went down, but we'll get into talking about all of that. Before we get into that, how's your guys' week? Chris?
Pretty good. As you mentioned, there's been quite a bit to talk about the last few days. But honestly, thought the game went about as basically how we expected. Maybe a little bit lower scoring. But yeah, we'll dive into all that plus all the other games, as well as the upcoming massive SEC game this weekend, which I'm really excited to talk about that. But yeah, I'll toss it over to Brian for his thoughts.
Yeah, no, I mean, similar. I think anytime that there's just off the field stuff that sort of distracts you from what everyone loves, and that's the game, that's unfortunate, and that's where we're at. But is what it is. Hopefully, it's in the past. I mean, yeah, it's been tough for me to sort of get up for college football this weekend just because of Michigan State and where we're at and the suspensions, and we're reeling on the road against a sleepy, tough Illinois team. But no, I'm excited nationally. I think there's a lot of great storylines. The first college football playoff rankings came out, so that always sparks conversations and debates. So it's always fun to get into those.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, we'll get right into it. First thing we're going to talk about is just obviously the Michigan State game. Holistically, we're going to only spend a couple of minutes talking about the tunnel incident, and the reason that is we've been talking about it throughout this entire week in our group chat. So we've kind of exhausted every type of dynamic of it. I definitely have a much different thought on this tunnel incident from when I did Monday to where I am now. So you guys are probably going to be a little bit shocked, but I'll start us off and then I'll transition over to you. Here's where I'll fault Michigan is that I will agree that when a rivalry game that is this contentious as it is between Michigan and Michigan State, and I think there should have been a bit more of alert of like there is going to be people that are going to be barking back and forth. They're going to be physical. So the post game incident, I do think there should have been a bit better of a security structure of the police saying like Michigan State, you go, we're going to guard off this side and facilitate that, or it just should have been known of like, all right, I do wish that Michigan would have said, guys, we're going to let Michigan State exit. Just be a little bit more aware, be socially aware of that was a very physical game that led to trash talking throughout the entire game. We don't like each other in general. So like it's not even worth this isn't like a Penn State where after the game they're walking up, after the game, it's a rivalry. So that's what I think, Michigan should be held a little bit accountable of maybe having that process more ironed out. I would maybe argue I've seen the narrative about Harbaugh being responsible for that. I think he probably could have said, like, this is what we need to do, maybe a little bit more like vocal about that in public. But I think I kind of put a little bit more blame on like the Michigan Stadium police and the people that were there because there was that one police person that just stood there when that one scuffle took place. So that's where I see from the Michigan side. From the Michigan State side, I don't think that the players associated with this are a representation of like the entire program. I don't think Mel Tucker, excuse me, leads a dirty program or anything like that. My biggest thing that I had said to you guys is that whoever that was that smashed a helmet over the head of Jamon Green, like that's the person that I'm like, listen, he needs to be kicked off the team. If people want to press charges, like while maybe I disagree with the premise of it, I can't really argue against it because, I hate to play this narrative, but if he connects and hits him in the head hard, like that could lead to a very serious injury. So that's where I stand on that. The other people that were, with Mick Burrows, I understand because of the video coming out that they got suspended, but after the week has taken place, I'm kind of like, maybe suspend him for a game as like just to show face to the public. But I didn't really have too much of an issue because it was like, I don't know, it sort of looked like a regular old scuffle to me. Like, you got a little bit dirtier than that. But my biggest point of emphasis after reflection, both sides accountable. I think that one player on Michigan State, there's no excuse for that. And certainly after this game, probably needs to be a better policy in place for the exiting of each team. So I'll defer over to you guys, and I know it's a different tune than what I had earlier in the week, but it is what I actually believe now.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah,
Go ahead,
no,
Jack.
I can go first. I think, yeah, I mean, we've talked about it from so many angles. I think one of the worst parts is that when these things happen in like the day and age that we're in now, these video clips get released on Twitter. Everyone sees them, but there's no context. You know, we still don't know who started it, what was said to Michigan State walking off the field, what started it in the tunnel. Was it Michigan State? Was it Michigan? And it just leads to speculation and that just leads to arguing and further divide. So it's just a terrible topic all around. And I think at a high level, it's being overblown pretty greatly. I haven't mentioned this yet. I've been saving it, but it reminded me from a situation that I may or may not have participated in Ann Arbor during the game in 2008. So painting the picture here. So this was the I think it was 2008. It was the Blair White game where he like scored in the first possession. We just dominated. But four guys, Michigan State fans, walking through Ann Arbor, going to a tailgate, passes a Michigan frat house that is having a tailgate. One guy in the group of four starts jabbing with one fraternity guy. Um, People start shoving, and then it turns into like a friend wants to protect his friend, and then a friend wants, no one is individually thinking that I want to gang up or I want to it just escalates so fast. It's a product of the situation. I think it's something that happens on college campuses all the time. I mean, toxic masculinity, alcohol is involved, or like for football sakes, adrenaline and testosterone. Their peak level. So I think it happens all the time. No one's trying to. It turned into a 30-versus 4 fight, just like the Michigan State things being portrayed. But no one's intending that to happen. No one wanted it to happen. It's a product of the situation. I don't, like you said, AP, I don't think is a reflection on MSU at all. I think, like James Franklin said, he didn't specify Michigan State. I mean, he predicted that something bad was going to happen in that tunnel just because of how Michigan acts and how the tunnel is structured. I think from following Michigan's program closely, I think it's very clear that Jim Harbaugh's teams don't know how to win, and they don't know how to lose. They don't know how to handle themselves. When they lose, they place blame. When they win, they talk smack. I'm all for talking smack on the field, but the off the field stuff, I think that's just silly. So I'm happy with how MSU has handled it so far. I would agree that Crump needs to be kicked off the team. The rest, I don't know how you're gonna put a verdict on the rest with just the information that's out there, unless there's other videos. But yeah, hopefully Michigan addresses it somehow, whether it's more security or a better process for getting players on and off the field. Hopefully that happens so it doesn't, nothing else happens in the future.
Chris?
Yeah, I think that I think there's things I agree with that both of you have said. I mean, I think that ultimately, like, fighting, extracurricular activities like that can't happen. It shouldn't happen after a football game, like whether it's an intense rivalry or whether it's, like a Penn State Michigan game where there's not like the rivalry aspect in there. Like either way, it just shouldn't be happening. And so I think that the 8 MSU guys are, have to take responsibility for their actions. You're caught on camera getting in a fight, you know, just like kind of the Michigan Wisconsin basketball game last year. I think the guys other than Crump will likely get, 1 or 2 game suspensions on. I don't think it warrants anything more than that. I mean, the Big Ten set a precedent last year with 1 game suspensions for like Moussa Diabate, who was throwing, punches on the court. So I think, one game suspension is probably about right. Whereas Crump, swinging the helmet, that's a kind of a different level of, that's escalating things. And then on the other side, I've seen, a few things here and there now that's starting to come out a little bit more that Michigan will likely bear some responsibility from like an administration standpoint, whether that's the university or their police department, just frankly not doing their jobs, not being present, and then not taking action when they saw guys getting in fights. I mean, I don't know how that happens. And then there's also the extracurricular, what happened to, the MSU bus, guys walking to the MSU bus after the locker room getting, attacked by Michigan fans, whether they're Jamon Green's family or not. So I think that, both sides bear some responsibility. Obviously, MSU bears more of it because of there's just more players involved and more people involved on their side. But it's just it shouldn't have happened. I was very disappointed as soon as I saw that it did happen after the game. I think emotions were high, and that it's more likely. I mean, it's not a crazy thing to say that like with a rivalry game and guys are going up a long, narrow tunnel together. It's not crazy to think that this would never happen. And it's unfortunate that it did. So that's kind of all I really have to say about it. I mean, I think punishments are being handled the way they should be. And I think it's kind of surprising we haven't heard anything from the Big Ten at
Yeah.
all. I mean, there's been nothing released, no additional video released from like, the ABC tunnel cam or anything like that. So I could kind of see it being, like they're almost waiting for like a Friday night news dump or like maybe a really late Sunday evening news dump where they're just like, we confirm the suspensions, investigation's over. Like if there's legal stuff that happens, that's outside of our purview as the conference. And I could see them on Sunday just being like, they've been punished. One player is dismissed from MSU, and that's it. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, like, again, it's just as I kind of simmered down and had to take away my biases, it was like kind of funny to think about from my side of going like with Harbaugh specifically, like he has been known for these like dust ups in San Francisco with like, Jim Schwartz. Like he just smacked, and then before that he had a thing with Pete Carroll. And then like when he was a player, he punched
broke his hand.
He punched Jim Kelly or whomever it was in the face, like, and it was a pregame interview. So I mean, like, I do agree with you, Bryant, that like now that they're winning, I kind of am just like I know it's not right to say like I kind of enjoy how they just like act as I'm hopeful that if they continue winning, like it's not they don't act like this, but yeah, I mean it is very much, Ohio State game last year, I was there. They did the same sort of like waving goodbye, jarring to them. I'm sure things would have taken place in that tunnel after the game if the crowd didn't rush the field and they were not going into the tunnel, right? So I agree with you. But let's move on to talking about the game itself. Mine's going to be kind of short and sweet. It's just like Michigan State. Here's what I'll say. So from Michigan's perspective, I actually enjoyed like how the game progressed because like everything is made about Michigan not able to score in the red zone, but if they play like this against Ohio State, like it's very much the same sort of thought process that we said last year of like you can't play like that against Ohio State. They're going to score too much, but they keep the ball for so long that like who's to say Ohio State goes 3 and out on a possession and then Michigan keeps it for 7 minutes of a quarter, 8 minutes of a quarter. So them showing that they could run on Michigan State, and I know you guys aren't, there's injuries, but you had a lot of guys back. You had and your defensive tackles are really good. And so seeing that they could run on MSU and you guys were amped up for a rivalry game, I just was like happy to see that. It was, of course I want the red zone offense to improve, but how the game ended up playing out after the end, I was kind of like, well, defense played well. They buckled down. Michigan on offense didn't have larger than a 3rd and 4 that was outside of the red zone until midway through the third quarter. So like that's pretty efficient offense, and overall I was happy with it. MSU played a good game. Their offense just stalled, as Bryant has said in the past, in the second half. So I'll let you guys talk about what you like though about Michigan State. Chris, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. And I would agree basically on everything that you said about Michigan. I think that Michigan's offense, and this is totally, and I give Harbaugh credit for this. It is predicated on being just super, super efficient, and it is. And it's because they're able to run the ball the way they are. And they have really good tight ends, and they use the tight ends like in a very, just a very intelligent way with getting Schoonmaker, isolated against a middle linebacker who's, who's a very good player, but not super mobile. I mean, he's gained some weight this year to play defensive end. So yeah, I think Michigan just has a good game plan. I think that, I mean, I don't want to go too much into like future projections here, but I think Michigan, their game plans work really well against teams that aren't very good or aren't or are limited somewhat offensively. And I think Ohio State will be kind of it'll be a reckoning. I think last year was a kind of a perfect storm, but we're not going to get into that right now. But with Michigan State, I'll say I was very overall happy with the defense. Honestly, from a look at the whole game, I'm not saying only with the first half or only with the first three quarters. Overall, I was happy with the defense. And to your point about Michigan being able to run on MSU's D line, I think most of those runs were, kind of off tackle, outside zone runs where they were isolating guys like Deshaun Mallory, who is a defensive tackle playing defensive end because there's so many injuries still in that position. But honestly, Michigan, just like last year, has a very good O line. Corum is very, very solid. I was actually surprised that Donovan Edwards didn't have much success. I was expecting him to have a little bit more balance, like kind of like the Penn State game where Corum and Donovan Edwards both had really good games. But MSU did a nice job against Donovan Edwards at least. So overall, pretty happy with the defense I mean, they give up under 200 yards passing. I would have taken that all day if you had told me ahead of the game that they're going to give up under 200 yards passing. But honestly, the biggest disappointment is clearly the MSU offense. Offensive line just isn't getting it done, frankly, and they sustained injuries against Michigan too, but they weren't getting it done before those injuries. And Thorne, I don't want to put too much like blame on Thorne, but I think it's kind of a combination between Thorne and then Jay Johnson's game plan was pretty good to start the game, but there was just little to no adjustments made at all. I mean, we talked about how when Michigan started to kind of shade one of the deep safeties over towards Keon Coleman, I mean that opens up the middle of the field. Where are the tight ends? Where's Jaden Reed? I mean, he had 4 catches for like 17 yards or something, and the tight ends were targeted, but I mean it wasn't like down the seams. It wasn't down the middle of the field. It was kind of like swing passes and things like that. So yeah, honestly, if you had given me that defensive performance, I would have taken it 10 out of 10 times, and I'm just really, really disappointed with the offense at this point. And I said this to you guys this week. I'm to the point where I would be maybe okay keeping Hazelton, and I'd almost rather them move on from Jay Johnson at this point.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
Yeah, no, I have similar thoughts, CP. I think on the offensive side, I love the game plan starting off. We opening drive, we were mixing up the running game with some reverses and misdirections.
yeah.
I like what we were doing in the passing game. We were having a lot of success. It got ruined by Horse, reacting to a late hit and getting a flag, and that killed the drive. But I think in the first quarter we largely outplayed Michigan, and it was a good game plan, but then it just crumbled from there. And I think it crumbled for a few reasons. One, yeah, the offensive game plan, I just don't understand what Jay Johnson was doing. I have a hard time blaming the O line or Thorne as well, but it just seems like the play calls that we were like. I remember the first play in the second half, it was just a drop back deep pass to Coleman. Like that's not what we were having success with in the first half. It was you do a stretch run, have gain 5 yards, you rush to the line, and then you throw it deep to Coleman. So it was more of like a thing that was like a momentum play, not just a straight drop back. So yeah, a lot of concerns on the offensive side of the ball. Jay was so good last year, but maybe all the points about it being mostly Kenneth Walker is true. I'm not sure, but yeah, on the defensive side, I think the other reason that we sort of crumbled is we just don't have the depth to stay out there with Michigan for how good they are at controlling the ball. We don't have the depth to do that. The players get tired, they get run down. Chris has his hand up.
Oh, I just wanted to. I figured that might be the way for me to like jump in without having to interrupt Brian. But To add, I think you made a great point. The one thing I will say is that last year, I think the O line was kind of night and day different. I
Yeah.
think, I think right now they're really struggling at center, right guard, right tackle. I think Spencer Brown's getting better at right tackle, but right now center and right guard are a big issue.
Yeah, I think losing Arcuri, Allen, and Jarvis and Buter, I think that was we overestimated or underestimated how good those guys were and the gaps that they were going to create this year. Um, but yeah, I mean, I would agree as well. I think the game plan on the defensive side of the ball was great. It was the best that you could expect, holding Michigan to what was 29. That's the best that you can expect on that side of the ball. So there's definitely positive momentum over there. And then yeah, for Michigan, I think. Again, we talked about it. Very, very impressed with Corum. I don't think anyone, even Michigan fans, thought he could be a bell cow and do 30 carries a game every game and have the success that he's having. His running style and sort of his stature and the running scheme for Michigan just is really hard to stop. But I also think they just continue to show that they were beatable. With the first half performance, the red zone issues, which you talked about, you're not going to beat Ohio State with field goals. Certainly the ball control helped last year, but again, we'll get into that later. I don't think that will work this year. And then yeah, JJ didn't look great at quarterback. He had some scrambles that created issues, but otherwise he was pretty off target in the passing game. And yeah, I think that their defense has some gaps that will be exposed by good offenses. But fortunately for Michigan, the only good offense they play is Ohio State all year.
Yeah, I think a little bit added to that point, Chris, that I agree with you that like for Michigan State's offense to be as good as what their fans want it to be, they just have to improve their offensive line. Like the reason they stalled bad in the second half is because you'd run it one, you get a carry, you'd either lose yards or you get 1 yard. So then you're in second and long and you got to throw it. You incomplete, then it's third and long, and then Michigan's just sending everybody after you. So it's like, I don't think it's totally like Kenneth Walker. Yes, he was incredible. He was the best running back in the country. But even if you guys had just like a bit more of a running attack that made their defenses need to be honest, I think it would open up a crazy amount. That was just what I noticed in the second half was Michigan was playing a bit more like press, which then led to them blitzing a little bit more. They shaded Rod Moore over to Coleman to take him out of the game. But I was very surprised that they didn't try to get Reed involved. They took that one shot to him, I felt like, in the second half. And, it was a bad throw, and then the other thing that I'll mention before we move on is talking about it is funny to see now, like, last year there was a big deal that was made about like from Michigan fans of, it was a little bit of home cooking. The ref didn't overturn, they overturned the sack, and then there was like, holding calls that weren't had. I think like the flip side happened this year where like I know Chris, you mentioned it, but I very much agree. Like I was really shocked that Eli Collins like third down run was marked short. Like that, I was like, wow, that's really fortunate for Michigan. And then there was another play in the second half that was like DJ Turner against Coleman. And I think it was when Rod Moore came and he knocked the ball down instead of like going for the interception. But if you look at the replay, like Coleman pulls away and DJ Turner just grabs his arm. And I was just like, I can't honestly believe that they're not calling some of this stuff. But it is, I don't know if it's like, if it really is something where the refs like get into like hearing from the opposing fan or like, I don't know what it is, but you could see certain things from last year at Michigan State, and then you can see definitely there was some home cooking. It seemed like from Michigan's end, but yeah. Overall, any last thoughts on the game that you guys want to touch on? I think we went through that pretty completely.
Yeah, I mean the one thing I would say with kind of the point you just made about home cooking is that like it's kind of like college basketball. You really need to expect that on the road. You're just not going to get like the same type of calls you would at home, and especially big games. So you just got to kind of be able to like play through like pass interferences and like kind of like Horst. It's just like he's too reactionary with stuff like that. He's kind of known for it. And honestly, I beat this drum since he was a transfer from Arkansas State. I think he's a good player. I do. but I think he's just kind of too reactionary and like he lets guys get in his head. But the one last like football point I'll make is I will say a lot of there's going to be a lot of comparisons drawn between the Michigan State game last year and this year and how it played out. Like Michigan kicking a lot of field goals last year and this year, but then scoring touchdowns against Ohio State. And so, I think there you can make a comparison there. But one comparison I would make is that Michigan also I thought had a lot better pass rush last year against Michigan State than they did this year, and I think that was a huge difference in the Ohio State game too. So we'll talk about that obviously, but just wanted to mention it.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, that is something like there were some things with the scheme of the offense during the game that I really liked. I know you guys mentioned like Donovan Edwards had a quieter game running the ball, but what they ended up doing a lot of times they ran the same play twice, and you'll know exactly what I'm describing. But the first time they ran this play, they saw that they matched up Donovan Edwards on Wyndham as a one-on-one, and it was a choice route where he could go inside or he could go outside. He went outside, caught the ball, and he rushed it. Donovan Edwards was like a 25-yard catch and run, got down to like the 3-yard line. So they saw like, man, if you're going to put Wyndham's a good athlete, but you can't put a middle linebacker on him. They're going to take it every single time. And then they use that same play structure to throw it down the field to Ronnie Bell towards the end of the game, where he hit him right in stride for like a 30 or 35-yard game. But it's just very bizarre that they refuse to like try to throw the ball. I do agree, Bryant, and we'll talk about this now in our matchup preview for both Michigan and Michigan State. But JJ, he had some good plays, but he missed a few guys. Like he missed. It was kind of shocking to see the misses that he had. So the other thing that I'll say is like this next game against Rutgers, Jim Harbaugh, if he has any freaking social and like emotional intelligence, he has to know that like, yeah, it might win this year. However, like you do have to play to recruiting, and like there will be no. I know that they're leading for like a 5-star quarterback in the 2024 class. You will not get any wide receiver or like top tier quarterback that's like, I'm just going to hand the ball off, or they're going to run the ball a bunch. So you got Rutgers, you got Nebraska. Like, I'm sorry, you have to feature the passing game if it's only strictly for like results of recruiting. Like you have to. So that'll be my last take. JJ has to hit some of these guys. I think it would have been a little bit better, but let's move forward and we can talk about the Michigan and Michigan State matchup before we talk about the big game of the weekend, which is Georgia versus Tennessee. Why don't we start with Michigan? They play at Rutgers. I don't even know what the point spread is, but
26, yeah.
26. Okay, well, this one, and it's at night. Like this is going to be, Rutgers isn't a very good team. They play hard. I mean, I'm actually kind of hoping that Greg Schiano does what he did last year, which was he completely sold out to take away the run against Michigan, and it forced them to have to pass it. It was a closer game than many would have anticipated, but I do agree. Like Michigan's got to improve with their pass game. Like it's got to at least be a threat. So that's what I'm hoping to see in this game. No injuries. It looks like they'll have a couple of guys out this week, but nothing like too crazy. And that's kind of what I'm expecting to see. I would imagine that they'll, feature that. If it ends up failing, then I think they'll still be able to run on them. But I'm hopeful that they can use these next two games before Illinois to really try to feature the passing game. I don't know if you guys have any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I in terms of the game, I think it's just a lopsided matchup. It's going to be destruction. We've talked about it though. I don't think Michigan has some secret playbook that features the passing game like Michigan fans want. And I can understand the frustration. I think you have to have that balanced offense to take the next level. We talked about there's still a gap with Michigan to a Georgia, for example. I think that's how you bridge the gap. But do they have the playmakers to do that now? They've got a bunch of guys at wide receiver. I don't know if they have any dudes, as we'll say. So maybe they just don't have the personnel. But yeah, I would expect Rutgers to sell out to stop the run. I don't think they're going to have any success. Like even the UConn game, I think is the UConn game where Corum had 5 touchdowns. I think it will be something similar to that.
Yeah. Chris?
Yeah, I think you guys are both kind of spot on. I mean, I think like maybe this could be like kind of like the Rutgers game last year where or even maybe like this past Michigan game where Rutgers, maybe is able to put together like a decent defensive performance for a half. Kind of like Indiana did this year against Michigan. But I think they're just going to start, even if they're selling out the run, I think Michigan's going to start breaking long runs. And I think their passing game will probably be, without too many headaches, pretty efficient. Maybe McCarthy puts up 240, 250 passing, with 2 touchdowns or something. And I think that would be plenty with that run game to score 42, however many points really they want to against Rutgers. And I don't see Rutgers putting together more than maybe 10 to 14 points. I mean, that would be very generous. So I could see, 42 to 10 or something like that. So yeah, I think that it'll be a pretty stress-free game.
Yeah, for sure. Let's move on to talking about Michigan State. Last I saw was Michigan State plus 17 against Illinois. I really wish that there wasn't this many suspensions because I actually think that if you had the lineup that you guys brought out against Michigan against Illinois, I think this would be a pretty close game because they play right into what Michigan State's strength is on defense, and they have an okay passing game, but it's honestly comparable or maybe even a little worse than what Michigan has pass game. So I want to hear your guys' thoughts first and foremost because I think like I don't want to be um, you know uh, I feel like I'd be almost like a dumb fan to think like maybe this might go Michigan State's way. Like you got what 8 players that are suspended, a few of them that are starters. So like I just and Illinois is a decent team, so I feel like I can't say that Michigan State is going to win this game, but if they were healthy, I definitely think this would be a very close game and a very interesting game. But I don't know, Chris, what are your thoughts of this game headed into it?
Yeah, I think that I saw a line that came out that I think they released it before any of the suspensions were announced, and it was 10 points or maybe it was 11 points,
Yeah, it was
which I
minus
think
10.
yeah, I think if they had Winman and Gross, I don't really think there's no other starters besides Winman and Gross out,
Zion
right?
Young.
Oh, and Zion Young too, who's kind of like a borderline starter or like first guy off the bench at the end. Um, yeah, I think if they had those guys, I think it would be more of like a 10 or 11 point spread, and MSU would have a lot better chance to stop the run game or slow it down a little bit. I think MSU's only real chance to put up points is to come out throwing the ball. I don't think this is a game where you try to have some semblance of balance in the beginning. I think the only way that MSU can hang is if they get early points on the board, and then they can try to play complementary football where they're mixing in end arounds and some of the zone run game. But I think if the MSU comes out and they're like immediately trying to be balanced, even like they were against Michigan, I think it just turns into that game again, and MSU will end up scoring 7 points or maybe 10 points, if that. But I think if MSU comes out and they're really aggressive, like I'm talking like Texas Tech 5 wide spread is kind of what I want to see in this game because I don't think they're going to have any early success running the ball. That is exactly what Illinois is hoping to stop is MSU trying to be balanced and running it 50% of the time. And if anything, I would like to see it skewed to be like 70% passing game early. And if MSU can somehow get to like let's say it's somehow 14-10 Illinois or something like that, then you go back to trying to be complimentary and slow the game down and take some time off the clock and run the ball. But I think if they start to do that in the beginning, they're not going to put up any points in the first half. It'll be like Minnesota, and they'll get down 14, 17, 21 points, and then they'll just have to go to the pass game, and by that point Illinois will be ready for it. But I think if they come out and pass the ball early, that's virtually their only chance,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I mean, CP, I agree with your assessment completely. Where I'm at with the game is it's just crazy. I mean, being 17-point dogs to Illinois football, That's life hitting you fast, and it's just rough. I'm not even concerned with the X's and O's this week. I think for me, what I'm looking for, this is the next big coaching test for Mel. These are the situations where teams either fold or they rally, and I think that's dependent on coaching and leadership. So, I just want to see how they respond. Are they pumped up? Are they playing crisp football, or is it a disaster like the Minnesota game? From the opening kick. And if it's the latter, I'm going to be obviously have lots of concerns. So I'm not optimistic for getting a win. I think we have a decent chance of slowing down Illinois' offense. Chase Brown is an incredible running back. He's very similar to Corum. He's small. He's really explosive, and their O line's good. But I think we can slow them down somewhat. I'm not optimistic on the offensive side. I don't think we're going to be able to run, and Illinois is really good pass defense, and they create a lot of turnovers. So I'm not optimistic for a win, but I want to see us play good football and sort of rally and sort of bring build on the performance of the positives of the Wisconsin and Michigan game. Keep building on that and rally around this adversity and play a good football game.
Yeah, it's interesting when you like really look at Illinois' schedule this year and like what they've done. Like obviously the record indicates they're a decent team, but it's like, are they? Like you really don't like they beat Wisconsin 34-10, good win, but that was Wisconsin with Christ, right? Before he got fired. And then they
Yeah.
played Iowa, they won 9-6. Then they
Yeah.
played Minnesota 26-14, but that was when Tanner Morgan got hurt. And
Yeah.
so then it's like, okay. And then they beat Nebraska, and it's Nebraska, and it was 26-9. So, I mean, I'm like, I guess I don't really know what Illinois is, like, so that's why there is a part of me that goes, maybe if Michigan State gets up a little bit, like, I don't know.
The one thing that I wanted to add, because Brian mentioned this with their pass defense is, I agree that it's good, and they play like press man with one deep safety, so like that type of coverage is typically what you would see teams attacking deep. One single safety, you're going to have a lot of deep shots. One thing I thought was interesting is, against Nebraska, Casey Thompson was hurt before halftime, and he only completed 7 passes against Illinois, but he had 172 yards on 7 passes.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, I think there's some yards to be had. I saw this from an Illinois writer, and they were like, Michigan State will have probably the best receivers MSU play or Illinois plays all year. And that includes Michigan, that includes, all the teams they played so far, Minnesota, Nebraska, etc. So I think it's like either pass the ball successfully and try to score some points, or you have no other avenue for success.
Yep.
Nice. All right. Well, let's move on to the big game of the weekend, which is the Georgia versus Tennessee. And admittedly, when that line came out, I was like, "What in the world?" Because I thought it was high.
Yeah.
But then you think about it a little bit more. I want you guys to start off here, Brian, and give me your thoughts on this game, because I have gone so back and forth on this, and I'll give you kind of my reasons why. But at Georgia, lane 8, what are your thoughts about how this game's going to play out?
Yeah, I mean, this is one that both my mind and my heart tells me Georgia is going to dominate. I think if it was in Knoxville, I think UT would have a shot. But I think Georgia is too good, and I think they're going to play up. They've done a little bit of playing up and down this year. I think they're going to play up and really try to prove a point. I think Tennessee is really awesome on offense, and they're hard to stop, but that plays right into Georgia's strength, their defense, their pass rush, their DBs. Like they're just elite at all 3 levels. They did lose their best linebacker, which is a slight concern, but for a program like Georgia, you just replace them with somebody that's just as athletic. So I think Georgia is going to win. I had it at like a -10 type of game. But what I'm going to be interested to see is, I think there's a potential for a Georgia blowout. And I think if Tennessee can somehow keep this close, a close loss at Georgia, they're going to be knocking on the door for getting the playoffs at 11-1 as a 4 seed, because they're going to win the rest of their games. They're not going to have a championship game. So if they can somehow keep it close, they're going to position themselves really well for the playoffs.
Yeah. Chris, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this sets up, like Brian just said, I think this sets up for the SEC for sure getting two teams into the college football playoff, whether that's the loser of this game, or Alabama, because the winner is in. The winner wins the SEC East basically, and will be in that, and will, probably win the conference championship game. The way I look at it, I was reading some previews about this game, and I think that the one outlier in terms of units in this game is the Tennessee defense. And frankly, it's not like they're playing what we thought Georgia's offense was last year early on with Stetson Bennett, where it's like they're just winning with their amazing defense. Georgia has a very high-powered offense. I believe it's second in the country behind Tennessee's, so it's like two super high-powered offenses, and then you have Georgia's defense, who's way up there, and then I think a step below would be Tennessee's defense.
Yeah.
So being at home, that definitely, I mean, those signs point to, me thinking Georgia will win. I just think it's a matter of, do they cover the 8 points? Is it a 7 point win? Is it a 10 to 14 point win? But at the same time, I also thought that Alabama would go in and, have like a 14 point win against Tennessee, and it wasn't the case. So I'm very, very impressed with Tennessee's offense. I have to say it's scary, and they probably have the best offensive line in the country based on what I've read and everything. Alec might have some issues with that, but I mean, but it's at least at least there's an argument for it. So yeah, I think I would give the edge to Georgia, but I'll just go ahead and say this is not on my card. I think this game, the spread could go either way.
Yeah. I battled with it because I've thought about, all right, so Tennessee, Tennessee absolutely murdered Kentucky, and then they beat Bama. They stomped LSU. And I agree with you. Like my mind is saying to me that like Georgia has a great defense. It's at home. They're gonna play up for this game, and they're gonna try to prove a point. So like and I mean you have to say it too, of like if Georgia's defense has success, they are a quick strike offense. So like they go 3 and out, and that time will go off for 35 seconds, right? Like that, I don't know. So like the other part of me though goes like, what if Tennessee is like where LSU was a few years ago in 2019, when you're looking back and going, man, they had Joe Burrow and Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. Like, what if Hendon Hooker is like a Joe Burrow? And what if
Yeah.
these wide receivers are like that? So I'm like, well, maybe they're just going to dominate. So I have a hard time figuring this one out. I'm just for the purposes of this podcast, I just got to make sure that I didn't indeed have it. Yeah, I don't. Okay. I didn't have it on my card. I'm gonna go with I'm just gonna go with what my head's saying, and that's Georgia's gonna win this game by somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 14. And it's strictly because they have an elite defense still, and their team plays up to their competition, and I think they're going to try to prove a point. So to that end, I think we can transition into talking about our picks for the weekend, and we'll go through our picks, and then I will give us a couple of minutes to preview to some of our listeners about a little bit of some college basketball insight, and we're going to defer over to our college basketball expert, Chris Porritt, on this podcast to talk about the Big Ten overall. But why don't we start by going through our picks? I'll start us off. I'll make it short and brief because I don't have a really in-depth outline as to why I'm picking these. It's really kind of straight from what I just think from my eyes watching these teams. First pick I have is Notre Dame plus 3.5 against Clemson. This one, I went back and forth on it a lot because I said to myself, well, Notre Dame, they play. I mean, they're the only team that beat North Carolina, and I mean they beat them like handedly, right? And North Carolina is a good team, and then they lose to Stanford. So then in my mind, I'm going, well, if Clemson stops Notre Dame's run game, which they very well should and could, then is Drew Pine going to be able to throw it around to Michael Mayer and some of these other people? Like, I don't know if that's going to take place. So then in my mind, I'm going, I think that, the Clemson can win by more than that. But I just kind of think Clemson's overrated. I really do. I really, really believe that they are like of the top 5 teams, I think they are the 5th team. I had no problem with the college football playoff putting Michigan 5 and Clemson 4, because at the end of the day, like, Michigan was never not going to get into the playoff as this year has gone by without beating Ohio State. So that'll work itself out. But I really just don't see it with Clemson. So I'm going to take Notre Dame there plus 3.5. My next game is a little surprising on the spread, but it's Texas against Kansas State. I saw it as Texas being favored minus 2.5 against Kansas State. I think Kansas State is a little bit of a phony. I think they're a good team. Don't get me wrong, but I don't know if I just have past PSD from, or not PSD. I have past experiences of watching Martinez, and he's just not good. So I think that'll play out here in this game, and I think Texas is going to win. And it's Texas minus 2.5, so I'm taking Texas there. And then my last game, which is actually in turn my lock, which is going to be Alabama minus 13.5 against LSU. And the strict reason of that is that, more so than Clemson, I am very confident that LSU is not as good as being the 10th ranked team in the country. I know it's a rivalry game, it's at LSU, but I have an inkling that this is going to be one of those Alabama is going to murder LSU. That's my lock of the weekend. I have Alabama winning that game comfortably. So, Bryant, why don't you give us your picks for the weekend, and I will write
Yeah.
these down.
Yeah, no, I don't have it on my card, but yeah, I'm very interested to see how the Clemson Notre Dame game plays out.
Yeah.
I have the same thoughts on Clemson of how good they are. I think they should be ranked fourth just because their schedule's been pretty tough. But how good are they? And then yeah, Notre Dame has just been a roller coaster. So it's how do you predict them? They're coming off a little bit of a high with a good win against Syracuse. That one I'm staying away from, but going to be interested in it. So my pick, so I'll start with my lock. I've got TCU -8 at home versus Texas Tech. Texas Tech, they got blasted last week by Baylor. They're reeling a little bit. And I think TCU can have that sort of slightly snub feeling from the college football playoff rankings being undefeated and ranked where they were. And I think now they know they need to, where they're at with the program, they need to perform really well if they want to rise. So I think they're gonna rise to that and blow out Texas Tech. I've got UNC -7.5 at Virginia. You mentioned it, AP, but UNC is pretty good. They're quietly 7-1. Drake May is getting better and better. The guy's elite, and their defense is slowly getting better. And Virginia is just truly terrible. So I like UNC to win at least by 2 touchdowns there. I do have Georgia on my card at -7.5. My confidence level is pretty high, but this is really, I mean, frankly, it's making my card just because I want a little bit more fun while I'm watching the game. But I do think Georgia is going to rise up and try to make a statement and win by 2 touchdowns. Fourth one, I've got Indiana -14 at home versus Penn State. On the Indiana side, they play really tough at home. They played Michigan and Maryland, both really close games at home. And I think we're going to have a letdown game from Penn State. I think coming off the Ohio State game, their emotions are going to be down. They're at the point where they're sort of out of the East contention, and I don't see them playing that well in sleepy Bloomington. So I think Indiana is going to keep it close with them. And then my last one, I've got Purdue -3.5 at home versus Iowa. I think Purdue needs to perform well. They're still in the West race. Iowa's not. I like Aiden O'Connell and Charlie Jones, the Iowa transfer wide receiver, to have a big game there, and Purdue to win by a touchdown plus.
I missed one of yours there. I'm sorry. TCU, UGA, IU, Purdue. What was
Yeah, UNC -7.5 at Virginia.
And what was your lock?
TCU.
Gotcha. Got it. All right, CP, let's hear it.
All right. I actually put together so I'll start with my bonus pick, which it's a bonus pick because the game is tonight. But I've got some boots on the ground in Seattle. My cousin Brock, he's got a buddy that's a meteorologist, and apparently the over under on that game is 54. But they're supposed to have a bunch of rain and wind tonight, and Oregon State loves to run the ball. So bonus pick is the under in that game on 54 points. But getting into the picks for Saturday, this one's a little sketchy because Oklahoma State just got blown out at Kansas State last weekend. but Oklahoma State is a 1-point underdog on the road to Kansas this weekend.
Wow.
And that's Kansas without their starting QB that, had so much success early in the season. So I'll take Oklahoma State as a road underdog. Um, Second game is Maryland at Wisconsin. This game I went back and forth on, but after thinking about it, this should be a healthy Taulia Tagovailoa, and I think Maryland will cover. They're actually 5-point underdogs. I have Maryland covering 5 points. I could see Wisconsin winning, but I think it'll be close, and they'll give up some points for sure. The next one, and it's because I think the spread on this game is too high. The spread is 14.5, but it's I think Liberty at Arkansas.
Oh,
I like Liberty to cover that 14.5. Liberty's got a dangerous passing attack. Arkansas started the year off pretty strong. I think they're a good team, like a decent to good team, but not very consistent. So, in the SEC, they've taken some losses because of that. So I'll take Liberty there. I'm gonna go the other way on the Iowa Purdue game. Again, I went back and forth on this pick. I think, Iowa's defense, is going to be a big factor here in keeping them within the point spread. And then I think, Iowa had some success last week against Northwestern, so, doesn't really mean anything. But I think Iowa can, keep that game close and maybe win by or lose by a late field goal or keep it close and possibly win. And then my final pick, going out a little bit on a limb here, but it's because I really don't think Stanford is very good at all. So I have Washington State -4.5 at Stanford. Washington State's coming off of a tough, controversial loss at home to Utah, where there was a very late, late in the game, there was a targeting call, or that might have been right before halftime. But Washington State lost their best defender on a targeting call that I think was garbage. It was against a running back, and running backs are allowed to lower their heads and deliver hits to defenders, but defenders aren't allowed to lower their heads and hit running backs, which I think is garbage, and I think it favors the offense. But anyways, that's an aside. I'll take Washington State to cover.
Nice. I like those picks. I didn't have it prepared coming into today, but I promise when I post this, I will have our updated records on the year. Chris is definitely winning. He's having himself a year, so I am passing the torch of the Oracle to Chris right now. But who knows? That might be bad luck. I don't know. Chris, why don't you with last few minutes that we have here, maybe give our listeners, as we were alluding to, a little preview of college basketball. Admittedly, I'm just not a huge college basketball guy. I'll watch it, but I don't really watch it until towards the end of the year. So let our listeners know what we can expect from the Big Ten this year.
Yeah, I think that, and I'll keep this real brief. But I think looking at the Big Ten right now, I think it's going to be a lot. I think there's 5, maybe 6 teams that could all be right there throughout the season. I think you have 2 teams in my mind that are the clear favorites, and those to me, most experts have those as Indiana and Michigan. I would actually say it's Indiana and Illinois. I think that Illinois added arguably the best transfer in the country in Terrence Shannon. He's a power forward from Texas Tech that was, almost going to go to Michigan and would have made Michigan legitimately like a top 10 team, I think. But he went to Illinois because of some issues. So I think Illinois and Indiana are the top 2. When looking at Michigan and Michigan State, and some of like the advanced metrics like Ken Pom, Torvik, things like that, early season, they both have Michigan and Michigan State pretty similar. I think Ken Pom has Michigan 26, MSU 31. Torvik has like MSU 21, Michigan like 26. So I think those 2 teams are going to be kind of like the, maybe 3rd and 4th or 4th and 5th best teams in the Big Ten. Who knows what can happen with that? But honestly, I think it'll be a really exciting early season. Michigan and Michigan State both have top 10 out of conference schedules. They both play Kentucky. Michigan plays North Carolina. Michigan State plays Gonzaga on an aircraft carrier. So I think there's going to be a lot of really, really fun games early on for people to watch. They're both in, I think Michigan is also in a holiday tournament. Michigan State's in that, PK 90 tournament where they'll likely play Alabama, potentially, maybe North Carolina, maybe Villanova, who knows? But yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting year. I don't think there's, I think there's a lot of, I guess there isn't a lot of clear cut separation between the teams that are at the top and the middle of the Big Ten. So it should be a battle all year, which I think those are the most fun years in the Big Ten. And I kind of love where Michigan State sits right now, just in terms of perception. They're not top 25 according to anybody, which, typically ISO teams will overperform when they're in that situation versus being, top 5. And then they have nowhere to go but finish below unless they get to the Final Four. So yeah, I think both Michigan and Michigan State have lots of questions. Michigan State's are in the front court, Michigan's are in the back court. Hunter Dickinson is, almost guaranteed to be a first team All Big Ten player. And I think AJ Hoggard and Tyson Walker and Jaden Akins is legitimately the best guard combo in the Big Ten, but Akins is hurt right now. So, we'll see what happens and how that develops, and how a guy like Jalen Llewellyn for Michigan will develop, and Jett Howard too. So should be fun.
Yeah. Brian, any thoughts on college basketball?
Yeah, no, I won't get into it too much. I think you hit on the main points there. I think from the Michigan State side, I'm already preparing myself that we're gonna rack up some losses. So I'm gonna, and there might be some blowout losses. I think Gonzaga and Kentucky, they have elite centers and we're weak there, so it could be bad. But I think it's going to be a team that is going to get better as we go, and I think it's going to be a dangerous team in March. So I'm sort of mentally preparing. Don't get too down, and keep building there. But yeah, I think the other point that I would touch on is just what you said, CP. A lot of people are like, the Big Ten shit. It's going to be a bad year, but I like those years. There's no favorites. It's going to be a dogfight. You could have Michigan State very well taking 10th in the conference and some random team like, Minnesota doing really well. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how the Big Ten standings play out throughout the year.
Yeah. And I unfortunately can't have any insight or lend any insight here, because I promise you, I know that Hoggard is a guy on Michigan State, but I couldn't name one other player on Michigan State's team. And with Michigan, like, I know of some players, but I don't know them really at all. So I'll hopefully get some insight for you throughout the year, but I got nothing for you right now. But good episode, guys. Excited for this weekend. Should be a good one. And thank you, everybody, as always, for listening. This has been the ABCs of CFB.